All right, imperialism part two. First, I want to apologize for all the sniffling in the first video. This weather is just honestly just So, anyway, I want to talk about our next involvement, the Philippine American War. On June 12, 1898, Emilio Aquinado declared the Philippines independent of Spain. In January of 1899, they formed a provisional government with the power and the elites of the mainland of the Philippine Islands. Fighting began on February 4th, 1899, where the U.S. and the Filipinos patrols fought at night. This will lead to a full-scale fight in Manila. Now, we had taken over by this point. The U.S. government called this an insurrection. This war will last from 1899 to 1902. Really longer, but you know how we are. So this actually lasts like 6 times longer. Six. Math isn't my strong suit today. It's actually a lot longer war than the Spanish-American War, but no one talks about this war. 70,000 American soldiers will fight. 4,196 Americans will die. 220,000 Filipinos will be killed. At first, the rebels used conventional warfare. They realized that they frankly could not, get on the field with the American military. So they went to a more of a guerrilla fighting, hit and run. They called it actually amigo warfare. They posed as friends during the day and attacked American positions at night. Something we really should have kept in mind when we get years later into Vietnam. Basically, we saw the same thing. In order to placate the Philippines, we're going to try to use persuasion and coercion. We built roads, we improved sanitation, we gave them vaccines like smallpox, and tens of thousands of Filipinos actually helped the United States. Now, rebel leaders were very harsh with those they saw as collaborators. In some places, the U.S. forces will use more brutality to stop the guerrillas, even burning some villages to the ground, because, winning the hearts and minds of people. We also used the water cure to get information. Do you know what the water cure is? It's waterboarding. It's actually legal at this point, and then actually it'll be considered a war crime, World War II. We actually will use 6,000 African American soldiers, even though they will be segregated. The Filipino rebels are actually pretty smart. They actually targeted the African American soldiers with messages like, "Why are you fighting for these white people? They are subjugating you in your own home, and you are coming to here to subjugate us." Really showed some very astute psychological understanding of America. It didn't particularly work very well, but it's kind of interesting. Now, what eventually brings the fighting in the Philippines to the end is the rebel leader Aquinado is captured on March 1901. It's actually the day after his birthday party. I guess they were too merry and party too much, and so they basically sneak up on him and grab him, and they force him to call his followers to lay down their weapons. Teddy Roosevelt, who had become president, declared the war over on July 4th, 1902, though troops will stay for another 11 years. In 1900, William Howard Taft became the first civilian governor general of the Philippines. He built roads, schools, improved sanitation, and even got Congress to buy church-held land from the Vatican and help the peasants with low-cost mortgages. So it kind of is a success, I guess. In 1904, at the St. Louis World Fair, we'll actually bring some Filipinos over and just kind of let people gawk at them to see how we civilized them. We dressed some in like some primitive clothes and then put them in some nice clothes and said, "See, the United States civilized these Filipinos who had been Catholic and, well, not primitive at all, but whatever, it doesn't really matter, I guess." So we are on our way to being a imperial power. We built a navy. In fact, Roosevelt was so proud of that Navy in 1907, he sent 16 warships and destroyers on a world tour. At first, Congress refused to let him do it. He started anyway, under the thought that there was enough money to get it halfway around the world, and there was no way that Congress wouldn't pay to complete the tour. So we are taking our place as a great power. Social Darwinism will definitely play a role. Many Americans want expansion. Josiah Strong said that it was manifest destiny. Some progressives saw it as a way to spread American values abroad, though other progressives were afraid that this would increase the power of big business and would lead to the exploitation of both foreign and American workers. They had a point. Others did not like the imperialism because it pulled away focus from reform efforts at home. So, we have very mixed views in this country about imperialism, but one thing is we're definitely on our way. Now, I mentioned at the end of the last video, we saw the Philippines and we saw Hawaii kind of as the gateway to East Asia and China. Well, China is an interesting country. It's basically the longest continuous civilization in the world. Basically, the people who were there in 4000 BC are the same people there today. Not a lot of foreign intervention in China. Well, Chinese history is actually very interesting. It kind of hits highs and lows. And generally, they consider themselves to be kind of the apex of civilization. Well, at the time of American imperialism, China is at the end of the Qing dynasty and is in decline. And in order for China to maintain its independence, they began granting most favored trading status to any country that asked for it, and that way they remained independent. In the 1880s and 90s, American missionaries began to arrive, and they began to move into the interior of China. They exaggerated Chinese interest in American goods. So, really it's the other way around. We're more interested in Chinese goods like dishes and vases and things and silk than they are in our manufactured goods. And even if they were interested in our goods, they were peasants. They couldn't afford it anyway. So all nations wanted a sphere of influence in China, and we wanted to make sure there was a future market for U.S. goods, so we did not want the major powers of the world to divide up China. So we institute the open door policy, which will allow all nations to trade freely with China. Now, China is the country that no one really checks with, and this leads to the Boxer Rebellion in 1900, where basically in the countryside, the Chinese peasants get kind of tired of the American and other missionaries telling them that they're going to go to hell, so they rise up against them and kill many missionaries. And so the response to this is the U.S. and other countries will send in troops. We sent 2,500 U.S. soldiers to China to restore order. When we did that, we demanded the victorious nations demanded $333 million in indemnities from China. We actually used our share of the money to pay for the tuition of Chinese college students in the country, before we banned them. In 1904, in that part of the world, Japan and Russia will fight over Manchuria. Japan will actually become the first nation. Now, we'll talk more about this when we get to World War I. Japan will actually be the first non-white nation to defeat a white nation in war. Roosevelt actually not negotiates the peace treaty. He wins the Nobel Peace Prize. In California, there is a campaign to exclude Japanese and Korean immigration. This upset the Japanese, not because they were being excluded, but because they were being put in the same group as other Asians as part of the quote-unquote yellow peril. We used to call Asian people yellow. even goes back to the 1980s. I was actually watching this cartoon called Defenders of the Earth. One of the characters is, well, two of the characters are black, and one is Asian. He's the ward of the magician guy. Really fun show. You should check it out. It's on Tubi TV. Anyway, um, it's really kind of amazing how long we called them yellow, called Asian people yellow. And it shows up in this where LJ, the young black son of one of the main superheroes, is talking to Kashin, and they're talking about disabilities, and there's a kid with a wheelchair. There's always something like that in the 80s, and LJ says to him, "We all have our own things. I'm black and you're yellow," and I was really kind of shocked by that, but it was kind of part of casual racism for a really long time. In fact, it was just recently that the U.S. Congress passed a law that took out any mention of the word Negro or Oriental in American laws. So, anyway, what's going on is we began to want to segregate Asians and put them in their own school. Now, what the Japanese didn't like, not that being put in their own school, but being put in the school with the Koreans and the Chinese, who they saw as inferior. Roosevelt does get California to back down, but he does end Japanese immigration to California and opens up Hawaii to Japanese immigration. That's why there's a lot of Japanese Americans there. In 1907, we signed the Gentleman's Agreement, where Japan agrees to deny passports to stop Japanese workers from immigrating into the country. This led to Japanese immigration not officially being banned. They could, however, issue passports to relatives to go to the U.S. until 1921. This led to the rise of picture brides, where people basically pretended to be married to the person or was related in some way. In 1906, there was an earthquake that led to a surge in immigrants because records were destroyed and they could not prove that they had not been there. In 1910, they set up Angel Island to screen Japanese and Chinese immigrants to make sure they really were family. Now, to me, it would be more suspicious if they actually knew a lot about their family member than not, because there's a lot of people in my family I couldn't tell you anything about them. In 1919, California made it illegal for Japanese immigrants to own property and said they could not become citizens, that only whites and African Americans could become citizens. This is actually upheld by a racist Supreme Court in Takayo Ozawa versus the United States. Ozawa sued over the legal definition of whiteness. Basically, he said, I was born in this country. I'm as American as everyone else. I'm kind of like a white person. They said, nope. And not only are you not white, and you can never be a citizen because only whites and blacks can be citizens. Blacks because of the 14th, 15th, and 16th Amendments. 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. Sorry about that. So actually that threw a whole wrench in the Indian problem too, if you remember from the West. Japan does agree. They wanted to stop the picture brides, and Japan agrees to do that in 1921. Congress will ban all Asian immigration in 1924. And so that's where we are there. Now, our next area is into Central and South America, where we have caused a lot of problems. Basically, in South America, we want to build the Panama Canal. It had begun under the French, but was never finished because, frankly, the technology just wasn't there to do it. In 1902, the U.S. offers the new Panama Canal Company $40 million for concessions and assets so they could take over the project. Now, but the problem was Colombia would not sell the rights to the Panama Canal for $10 million. The problem was the contract that the U.S. bought was going to expire in 1904, and Colombia thought that if they could stall, then they would get the $40 million that the United States had paid. And so it was in their best interest to not allow the United States to go on. So in 1903, Panama revolted against Colombia, encouraged by the new Panama Canal Company. Never given direct assurance of U.S. support, but there's a lot of winking and nudging. The U.S. then said they had the right to build and protect the canal because of an 1846 treaty. This was so shady that in the 1920s, and by the way, Panama wins, and we say, hey, you're an independent country now. And they're like, hey, awesome, you can build your canal. This was so shady in the 1920s, Congress sent $25 million in an apology to Colombia. So Panama Revolution succeeds. We began working. There are lots of challenges for completion. Had to use lots of foreign workers. Roosevelt, as president, will actually visit the site, becoming the first president to actually leave the country during his term. 4,500 black workers and 500 white Americans died during construction. In 1904, Roosevelt signs the Roosevelt Corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. Monroe Doctrine has said European power should stay out of this. What the Roosevelt Corollary says is that we have the right to intervene in Central and South America when American issues are involved. This will be used when George H.W. Bush went after Noriega. That was what was used. Taft will expand influence over the region. Wilson, a Democratic president, will also protect U.S. interests in Latin America. Even William Jennings Bryan, who we're going to talk a lot more about in the future, believed in an active presence in Latin America. By 1915, Haiti, Cuba, the Dominican Republic, and Panama were all U.S. protectorates. On August 15, 1914, the Panama Canal officially opened, and we had a 99-year lease, and we don't own it anymore, but I think we still use it. Of course, some of our ships are too big now anyway. So what's going to happen now? That's all I'm going to say in the lecture. A couple more videos for you to watch, and I'm going to have a bunch of yellow journalism headlines and political cartoons for you to kind of look at. And, we'll have some other videos that you can take a look at. And I look forward to seeing what you guys think about imperialism.